Thanks for coming out. My name is Abeo Chamika Tisdale. I'm the programming assistant at Charis Books and More. We are the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. Tonight, we are so excited to be here with Monique Couvson, who is the author of Girls Unlimited: How to Invest in Our Daughters with More Than Money, a compelling, passionate case for why we should invest in girls' unlimited potential. Tonight, Monique will be in conversation with Paris Hatcher, a Black queer visionary feminist who has been organizing individuals and organizations toward liberation at the local, national, and international levels for 20 years. She is currently the founder and executive director of Black Feminist Future, a national Black feminist organization that amplifies and builds the power of Black feminist leaders, organizations, and movements. In this role, she also serves on the leadership team of the Movement for Black Lives. And our author of the hour, Monique Couvson. Monique is the president CEO of GFGC and co founder of the National Black Women's Justice Institute. She is the author of several books, including Push Out, Black Stats, Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, and Charisma's Turn, all from the New Press. Her work has been featured by Time, NPR, The New York Times, MSNBC, Essence, The Atlantic, TED, The Washington Post, Education Week, and others. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. There'll be a Q&A at the end of the event, so keep your questions in mind. And for folks online, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I'll read them aloud. And lastly, buying your book from Charis directly helps us keep putting on free events like this. So afterwards, Olivia will be up front selling books. And for folks online, you can press the green button at the bottom of your screen to get the book from us. Monique, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here in the Atlanta area because my daughter went to Spelman, and I enjoyed the time that I got to come in and be in conversation with her about her learning journey here in this region, but also just all the things that that continue to grow and come out of the South are very exciting to me as it pertains to the well-being of our girls. I am Monique Couvson, everybody. Hi. And I want to start by reading. I want to start by, sort of maybe just anchoring a little bit in why I wrote this book. And then I want to read a little bit and then we'll talk.
Perfect.
So I wanted to write Girls Unlimited because people sometimes will see me and know what I do and kind of receive me as an advocate for girls and say, you're the one who's going to lead us to this specific kind of space around certain issues. I lead a national foundation that does a lot of work in resourcing organizations and movements that center the wisdom and well-being of girls and gender expansive youth of color. So I'm often in spaces where I'm talking about girls. I'm often in spaces where I'm talking about patriarchy and gender-based violence and all these things, but people don't know how I got here. And people don't know that everyone can get here. Mm-hmm. And so there is something special about my journey, but it's not that it's unique to me in the sense that no one else can replicate a journey toward being an advocate for girls. Okay. And so I wanted to write a book that invites everyone into this world, that invites folks into my world a little more, and to explore all the ways that we can show up for our girls. The funding climate, wow, the political climates, these are all things that we consider challenges these days. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to be in conversation. I mean, it's sort of serendipitous around the timing, honestly, of this book. But I wanted to be in conversation with our broader community about what we need to do, what we can do right now, when times are hard, what costs money, what doesn't, and how we can be in a much more robust state of investment when it comes to girl-identified bodies. So I want to start by just sharing, that I write this book. So I start the book with this conversation between me and Dr. Nikki Giovanni, which was like a dream come true in having an opportunity to have conversations with one of our brightest minds and Black feminist scholars and poets and dreamers. And so that kind of set the stage for me in how I wanted to approach this work. And I wanted to not only talk about data and policy and all the things that I tend to talk about, I wanted to talk about what kind of anchor we need in when we're first approaching working with girls, what needs to be the foundation. And so the foundation that I chose to start with was our knowing. I chose to start with knowing because it is slightly mystical. It is spiritual. It is who we are as whole beings, and it begins when we're girls. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to read a little bit from the first chapter called Knowing is Girls' Superpower. And I started the chapter with a quote from Zora Neale Hurston, who says, "I have the nerve to walk my own way, however hard, in my search for reality, rather than climb upon the rattling wagon of wishful illusions." And then I go into what is my greatest accomplishment, which is being a mother. My younger daughter, Mahogany, has always been precocious. For as long as I can remember, she has been inspired by learning and excited to share her knowledge with others. One of my favorite images of her is a photo taken during her third grade science class in 2012. It shows her reaching upward, rising from her seat as her hand is thrust like a blade above her classmate's head. With a pencil in her other hand resting next to a worksheet and microscope, her head is turned toward the front of the classroom, undoubtedly facing her teacher, Miss Elaine. Her long dreadlocks neatly pulled back into two ponytails that fell to her elbows, Mahogany's caramel skin pops against a white tee beneath a black long-sleeve shirt. Her lips slightly parted, she's clearly indicating that she's ready to answer a question. My baby knows the answer, or at least she believes she does. Honestly, it doesn't even matter if she was actually called on to answer the question or whether her answer was correct. She was actively participating in learning. Another reason I love this photo is the studious look on her classmate's face as she gripped the edge of a pen with her teeth while looking in the same direction as Mahogany. Not only does this image capture a beautiful moment of girls enthralled in learning, but it reflects the incredible work of their teacher to create an environment where girls felt comfortable engaging. In classrooms across the US, boys dominate in class participation, which is associated with the gender gap in the sciences. By age 6, girls believe they are less likely than boys to be really, really smart. But this photo inspires me to envision a different scenario. That year, with the encouragement of this same third grade teacher, my daughter discovered books that developed a voracious appetite for reading in her. By this time, Mahogany and her elder sister, and my elder daughter Ebony, had been traveling with me for years to work events, and they were familiar with my interpretations and articulations of justice. My participatory worldview was familiar to them, and they'd listened to hours of lectures and presentations on race, gender, justice, and education. They understood my fundamental commitment to the idea that people at the center of any inquiry should be involved in the collection and interpretation of any data such an inquiry yields. They knew that my critique of social and systemic patriarchy, how social institutions are often structured to reify the presumptive supremacy of men, was an extension of my belief in equity, in my belief that all people should have equal access to a life of dignity and respect. In their earlier years, they toddled around my office as I led research on the prevalence and impact of racial and gender discrimination in the public sector, and they took pride in dressing professionally to march around my office at the NAACP national headquarters. They both learned about social responsibility, the notion that they would use their talents and skills to contribute positively to society early, and knew that they would have the freedom to pursue their own paths toward becoming the best version of themselves, with one requirement. I asked that whatever they do it toward the advancement of freedom for themselves and for their people. They agreed, understanding early that as African Americans, we are the descendants of people who survived one of the most heinous and egregious efforts in history to dehumanize and subjugate our ancestors. They have also demonstrated their understanding by embracing their freedom to pursue whatever field of endeavor that appeals to them. Naturally inquisitive and lacking the filter that typically comes with age and discernment, Mahogany liked to ask a lot of questions. She had specific questions about freedom, so she started to answer them for herself in the third grade by reading the narratives of enslaved people. I noticed that this interest in justice led her to pay close attention when I was lecturing or talking to colleagues about strategies for freedom to take shape. For example, in the early 2010s, I had written a report for the African American Policy Forum, a national think tank led by prominent legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, which brings together academics, activists, and policymakers in an interdisciplinary interrogation of how to dismantle structural inequality. My report, entitled Race, Gender, and the School to Prison Pipeline, was about expanding the school to prison pipeline to include an analysis for Black girls. In it, I explored how existing frameworks and data captured or failed to capture the specific experiences of girls along the continuum of experiences associated with the use of discipline in schools. Following the release of that paper, I met with Kimberly Crenshaw and another impressive legal scholar, Priscilla Ochen, to discuss how we could continue to amplify the need for social, institutional, and economic investments to improve the plight of Black girls. We decided to meet in Monterey, California, a coastal town known for its beaches, a world-class aquarium, and proximity to blue whales of the Pacific Ocean. Monterey was a perfect location between Oakland, where I was based at the time, and Los Angeles, where they were. We spent our time together exploring how we might begin to make academic concepts relatable to the public and how we might continue to amplify the voices of girls in ongoing public discourses about educational equity. We talked through potential approaches to popularize rhetoric that includes women and girls and narratives about the impact of racial bias. And as I had done over the course of their lives, I brought my daughters to work with me. After a full day of meeting, we broke for dinner. Both girls were excited to finally get outside to the boardwalk, so they quickly assembled by the door as we prepared to leave the hotel. Mahogany walked up to Priscilla and asked a question not uncommon for inquisitive and unfiltered children. "How old are you?" she asked. "How old do you think I am?" Priscilla responded. Mahogany looked at her carefully and then replied, 19. Priscilla laughed and pulled Mahogany in close. "See," she chuckled, "that's why I love you." Mahogany smiled, satisfied by the affirmation, and went on to tell Priscilla more about herself. After a short conversation about the gracious aging of process of Black women, how Black don't crack, I looked on as Mahogany continued her conversation with Priscilla. "I've read so many books," she announced, beaming with pride. "That's great," Priscilla said in a soft and even tone. "But what's really important is that you have a critical analysis." "Critical analysis," Mahogany repeated, her 8-year-old voice softening with uncertainty. "Critical analysis," Priscilla repeated firmly. Mahogany nodded, and she's been nurturing the notion in her expressions of leadership ever since. As her mother, I remain grateful to Priscilla for sharing that nugget of wisdom and truth with my daughter. Both of my daughters have had the opportunity to interface with many powerhouse women throughout their lives, and this is among my favorite moments because in that exchange, Priscilla challenged Mahogany to do more than just read. She wanted her to think. She encouraged her to know. She wanted her to lead with this knowing. And this underscored the importance for me to continue teaching both of my daughters the power of engaging each and every way we might acquire and express knowledge. Activating the critical analysis of girls unlocks their ability to access their multiple ways of knowing.
Thank you. Wow, let's give it up.
That is one of my favorite stories to tell about Mahogany, and anyone who knows Mahogany knows that she still asks a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But I love that there was this early encouragement of her to tap into that part of her being, especially knowing that, by age 6, girls start to lose confidence in their ability to ask these kinds of questions. And so how we pour into them to encourage them to challenge that idea makes all the difference in the world. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to have a conversation with you here, because you, like me, have built institutions that are very focused on how we provide spaces, not only for there just to be a knowing and an exercise of knowing on behalf of our girls and young people and young women, but to think about how we build out this stronger capacity for knowing in a way that is foundational, really, for other movements.
Right.
And so for years and years, I was told quite explicitly that girls were not a priority.
Mm.
and that we had to wait our turn,
Yeah.
right? And that we had to stand down in some spaces and be patient in others.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in thinking about the organizations that you've built, the movements that we've been a part of together,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about, first of all, what Black feminist future is, but also
Yeah.
like let's dig into this knowing, like
Yeah.
let's dig into how we begin to invest in our daughters such that their knowing is elevated rather
Yeah.
than suppressed.
I love that so much. I'm gonna move this mic. I hope that it doesn't. I realize I'm leaning more this way than I want to be. People deserved and needed a space to be able to exercise our activism and vision for the world. And now, in this newest iteration of my life at Black Feminist Future, in our DNA, the way that we do our work, we talk about the inherent value of Black women, girls, and gender expansive people. And the Black girls and gender expansive youth part is so critical and key, mostly because we, and what I, there's these remarks that I want to make in reference to your book, but I may touch on it here. It's not that young people are worth investing in when we are young, not like when you grow up, like, oh, now you deserve the investment.
Yeah.
And especially around understanding, which I think are some of the core tenets of feminisms, our self, our body, our autonomy, our community, our safety, and start to demand what that is. Because, especially for girls, you highlight this in your book, the erosion and people passing those our boundaries happen so young, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having full awareness of our autonomy, our bodies, our sexuality, especially for girls and gender expansive youth, we get so many restrictions around what to wear, what to do around this. So being able to cultivate, not for a future leader,
Mm-hmm.
which is important, but
Mm-hmm.
for the leaders you are now,
That's right.
is very critical and crucial. But I want to talk about this incredible book. So thank you for asking about me. We're Black Feminist Future is headquartered here. Please check us out. We're on IG, Black Feminist Future. We are a national organization dedicated to amplifying the power and brilliance of Black women, girls, and gender expansive people, and also reclaiming the legacy of Black feminism and Black feminism through Black feminism. So check us out. This book is incredible. I want to go back to my notes. It's such an honor to be in conversation with this incredible, brilliant mind, our champion of girls and gender expansive youth tonight. This is sacred work, and you uplift the lives and experience and brilliance of girls and gender expansive people. And it's incredible. It's so clear in this book and all the work that you do that girls are the center and girls deserve to be the center. You remind us that they're sacred and that if our movement is to do serious work, it must center on girls and gender expansive young people. I have deep appreciation because I find the book to be a guidebook, not just for young people to read it and understand their lives better, but for adults to be accomplices alongside girls and gender expansive people, so that you're not, you can be actually an accomplice, not someone that's like, okay, I'm going to smother, take over, but I'm going to help you unlock your potential. And from your conversation with Nikki Giovanni, where she talks about girls as being the yoke, no, the yoke, that means that adults need to be the not the protective, but this really important but separate barrier that allows girls to make their magic, as well as when you're talking to Tarana about, we don't just need one solution, but multiple interventions to make this happen, and that we must also be thinking about systemic barriers. You really give so, I mean, it's literally the chapter layout is literally, this is the guidebook to how you do it to really help make sure that girls are unlimited.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't pay for this endorsement.
No. But I just, it's really, really helpful, especially, when you were talking about wait your turn, the first thing that came in my mind was like, oh, brother's keeper anybody. And I know that you had to live through, to be on the front lines of like, we need to just invest in boys only, as if they're the only young people who are trying to make sense of the world or need resources or support. um, it seemed like people were really clued into the way that boys know or experiencing the world. So I really love, and it's actually a part of my thesis when I was at Clark Atlanta. My master's thesis was to explore ways of knowing.
Yeah.
I'm very curious around this, especially sometimes we call it like mother wit, or passing through folk stories, the way that you know what you know, like how do I know what I know. So for you to just have a chapter that's about knowing and girls knowing, I want you to talk more about that. It was so great that you started talking about that. It's in the book. The knowing is so, because it feels almost like a DNA, like you said, it's mystic. So let's talk about this knowing.
Yeah, because it was always important to me. So I always felt like My Brother's Keeper was an important initiative.
Of course, yeah.
And I want to be clear about that because it was an important initiative.
Yeah.
And I always said in real time that the investment in boys could not be made to the exclusion of an investment in girls.
Right.
And that they're sharing systems of oppression, sharing classrooms, sharing households, sharing conditions, that if we're going to talk about community growth, we've got to do both.
Right.
And, to their credit, the White House did hear and start to develop a council and engage around girls, but it wasn't as robust. The financial investment was not as robust. The community organizing was not as robust. There was still some coming from behind to say, what about the girls? Right. Being in a room, what about the girls? And so we were tired of that.
Right.
and I think that what we've been trying to build now is a deeper understanding and a more rigorous engagement of how we come to understand what is important to invest in. And that's why I wanted to start with knowing, because when we engage in young people, so first of all, it was like I didn't come to a really strong inquiry around my own personal knowing academically until I was an adult, right? I was in grad school before I took a moment with myself to say, I know all these things. How do I know what I know, right? We call this like an epistemological consideration and a way of understanding knowledge, and not just that but how you know what you know. So the deep inquiry around how I know what I know was important to me because it invited me to extend the epistemology, to think beyond just the statistics, the facts, the figures, the policies, the theories, and start to also engage the experiences, to also understand the art and the stories, and to understand who are the keepers of these stories, who are the keepers of this art, who are the creators of this art. Where does it live? Where does it live in our bodies? Where does it live in our consciousness? Where does it live in our production? Where does it live in our imaginations? And how we begin to construct interventions when we see problems, but also how we interact with each other just as human beings. And so when I was writing this book about where do we begin when we start talking about the worlds we want to create with and for our girls? We have to start with how we understand and how we support their understanding of their place. Not in a socialized way, but in a way that locates themselves. I talked about this a little bit in Push Out, where I sort of similarly draw from that period of time that I was working closely with Kimberly Crenshaw, and we were in and out of different schools and having conversations with folks. And the girls that I would talk to, we would go in and talk to them about discipline and the things that were happening in schools, and they kept giving examples of the boys, of what was happening with the boys. And I was like, that's a problem. Now I'm asking you about you. And I remember, I'll never forget the look on one girl's face where she paused and she was like, oh, you want to know about me?
Right.
And that they were so conditioned
yes,
to have talking points and an analysis around what was happening with the people around them, that they were losing sight of their own sense of knowing and analysis about their own lived experiences. And so when I was writing Girls Unlimited, I just wanted to start there, right? And my biggest teachers in this have been my daughters. that being able to, we were talking earlier about the privilege of being able to raise girls while I advocate for girls is a unique experience, because there was definitely a push-pull, right?
Right.
There's the mother who wants to protect. There's the mother who wants to, you know, be in space around my girls that keeps them out of harm's way. And then there's the advocate who understands the wisdom in their bodies and
Right.
understands the knowing that they have and the strength that they hold that I want to pull out.
Right.
And so having a conversation about knowing, having a conversation about what it means to engage girls as sacred and to come to the inquiry around girls with a centering around the sacred just means that you're seeing a whole person, a whole energy, a whole spirit, not just a person in a body that we have defined as female and then sort of engage according to the socializations of our communities.
Yeah.
And so when you experience a young person as a spirit, when you experience a young person as energy, then it just takes you to a different place. And when you teach that young person to recognize that in themselves, that's when they start to understand that they can locate themselves in any condition, in any policy, in any practice, in any environment. So we move them away from only having an analysis about people around them in a sort of dissociated way,
right,
and bring them closer to themselves, not to be egocentric, but to understand themselves as important to understanding the condition.
Yeah. In this chapter, I thought what was just so important, especially at this time, we've been talking a lot at Black Feminist Future about how, and it's not just Black Feminist Future, everywhere, that people are isolated and disconnected from community, but are finding community online, or I don't know, community, more echo chambers, more, but also deeply isolated. And there was something that was really important here around teaching girls to empower their voices. This is from you, and not weaponize them. Girls' voices can be used to do more than just articulate pain. They can be a source of power. And I'd love for us to talk more about that, especially, I think oftentimes maybe people only expect to hear, and sometimes it's actually just righteous rage. And especially when there is an adult accomplice that's like, let me hear your righteous rage, that can come out. But how do we really start to shape that? You lift some organizations that are doing that, to shape the righteous rage, to turn into it being a source of power.
Yeah. So one is understanding that your voice is valid.
Yeah.
Period. Right? Like recognizing that how you say, what you say, it is all valid. I started the chapter in Knowing with Zora Neale Hurston because in her style of writing, she would write in the voice of the people. Sometimes that wasn't very popular among scholars who were trying to say that people shouldn't write the way people talk.
Right.
But as a cultural anthropologist, she was like, no, how they speak, how they frame their own lived experience is valuable in and of itself, which gives it power, right?
It's a knowing.
It's a knowing. And so the way that I talk about girls knowing with respect to language and voice, sometimes I talk about it in different ways. One is to, number one, explore that even the quiet girl is giving voice, right? That even in her silence, there is something being communicated that should be understood as powerful and a voice. And when we understand how to read the nonverbal cues along with the verbal cues, that's when we start to recognize how girls are locating themselves across a spectrum of experiences and or in a state of recovery or sometimes just in combat with some of the conditions around them. I like that this was an opportunity to get a little, to go into a different space around voice, because oftentimes, we believe that if a person is not, sort of raising their hand and being on the front lines, and with a lot of our young people, that's how we define advocacy. Right? It's like, are you speaking up? Are you saying something? But advocacy can look so many different types of ways, right? Like I used to arrogantly, well, not arrogant, I won't say arrogantly, but I used to walk around and say, I'm not a marcher, because I'm not. But I will write some books. I will write some papers. I will walk into the judge's office and judges' chambers and have one-on-one conversations about the data in their courtroom, right? And what's happening in those spaces to advocate for young people. But I'm not going to be I'm not a marcher.
Right.
So I was like, everybody has their
Right.
gift.
Yeah.
And my core understanding that was given to me, I think, and reinforced in a lot of ways from my mentors over time, was that you bring your skill set to the party.
Yeah.
And your skill set can be anything.
Yeah.
And that is your voice. That is your contribution, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when girls have ways of mobilizing and building power, and it looks like play, and it looks like braiding, and it looks like art, and it looks like all these things that people don't recognize as either healing modalities or power building strategies, then there's a disconnect between how we invest in those things, how we understand them as articulations, right? I.e., voice,
Right.
right? Language, and whether or not we're going to actually see them as something other than cute. So Maheen is here.
Uh-huh.
Say hi to the people, Maheen. Maheen is the vice president at G4GC, works very, very closely with me.
Yeah.
And we have this thing that we talk about often around the way that people invest in girls is often perceived as cute. And I put it in here because we're like, they look adorable and they'll say they're so cute and people want them to play and be cute. But cute money doesn't get to robust transformation.
Exactly. Say that.
Right? And that's exactly what they're doing. I mean, that they happen to be amazing looking as they're doing it or adorable as they're doing it is a bonus, right? But we have to see it as a bonus, not as an indicator of its value or an indicator of whether or not it is something that we perceive as robust.
Yeah.
And so the challenge in this text is for us to expand our understanding of just what it looks like to grow up in girlhoods. Because there's not, I mean, I share a lot of my personal story in this and what informs my knowing and my engagement with girls around the world. But there are different types of girlhoods.
Yes.
And so once we start to understand the complexity of these experiences, then we can offer new ways of and opportunities to invest in its growth and well-being.
Yeah, what I love is the last chapter when you're talking about financial investment and philanthropy. You mentioned that oftentimes the US movement or investment in girls, or just even seeing girls' leadership, is just very different, and that the same modalities that would be done someplace else, it's like, oh, well, that's we will give them to the girls over there, right? Not the girls here.
That drives me crazy.
I know, like, oh, this incredible project in Uganda, and it's like, well, they're doing it also here in Chicago, and it's like, but it's really interesting in Uganda, and some of that, is it's the fetish, is the othering, and also I have learned a lot from the girls' movements, girls' rights movements globally, as well. So I do think that there's some learning there. But when you talked about cute, I think similarly, feminist movements are also in gender. Whenever we talk about gender, it's like, oh, look at them. They're doing something. Let's just give them cute little bite-sized little chunks of money. Let them play. We'll give the big money to racial justice as if they're not the same, right? Like, we're talking about the same people. Like, we are living at the intersections of multiple identities. So I just think that's just very, very important. And so I'd like for you, I mean, again, we talk about this as a guidebook. Let's talk about, I want to just read out the chapters as this guidebook, because I also think for some of us in the room, we're in various stages in our life, either super close in our girlhood, maybe a couple years away, or we want to be accomplices. You set this up really beautifully. So knowing is girls' superpower, elevate purpose over punishment, dismantle the structural barriers to her success, protect girls from gender-based violence, invest in girls' education and mentorship, and make the financial investment. I really love this setup because again, this is a guidebook. It really tells people how to do it. I was really struck with chapter 4, Protect Girls from Gender-Based Violence. I think it's one of the most key and crucial bits. Billy Avery, who is a well-known Black feminist scholar, champion, is like the actual the mother of of reproductive justice. She talks about something called the conspiracy of silence, how we conspire. You know, there's whether it's about abortion access or around sexual abuse or around patriarchal violence, and that we collude in our conspiracy and we don't talk about it. We don't share our stories. So then that becomes the shame. It becomes, it becomes so much, and how we have to really interrupt the conspiracy of silence. And I do think there's this really big conspiracy of silence around the reality and the proximity of girls and gender expansive people around gender-based violence. Mm-hmm. And so I was hoping that we could share a little bit more around that, especially around our need to interrupt, not only protect, but interrupt, make sure that it never happens, because it truly can and does change the trajectory of someone's life and them being able to tap into their unlimited potential.
Yeah, no question. I spent a lot of time on this question of gender-based violence. Even though there's a chapter dedicated to it, you see elements of it throughout the book, partly because I'm telling my own story and I'm a survivor of many things.
Yeah.
And so I think, what has been most important to me in this conversation is for us to think about how do we build out the conditions that allow girls to thrive in their adulthood because of what we've done, not despite what we've done.
Right.
And that's a key thing that I want people to take away. Like, if you take nothing else from Girls Unlimited, how do we create the conditions for girls to grow into adulthood thriving because of what we've done, not despite what we have done? Mm. And so the conversation about gender-based violence, number one, it was important to me to define it in the book, because a lot of times people just think it's about hitting,
right,
or rape. And it's so much bigger than that. And it can be verbal, it can be emotional, it can be financial,
right,
it can include stalking, there's just so many ways to cause. It can be structural, it can be political.
Yes.
Like, there are lots of ways that we're witnessing and living through a series of practices that are essentially gender-based violence. And when we start to really understand them as elements of gender-based violence, and if we're in commitment to dismantle that, then how we react to these policies, how we react to these conditions, how we react to these lyrics, all these things make a difference in our lives. And, I believe, when, as a mother, I believe in the censorship.
Yeah.
So there was a time when my girls did not listen to certain things because I understood priming and I understood conditioning. And I was like, if you listen to it, then we have to, I was like, you'll get to it eventually, but you're going to have to be old enough to talk to me about it, because I don't want you just internalizing it and thinking that that's what is supposed to be.
Right.
And even with that, we still have conditions that lead us into spaces that cause harm or lead to harm in our bodies, or that lead to harm in our spirit.
Yeah.
And I believe that's, part of how we combat that, how we prevent that, is to build out, number one, an understanding of what it is, but also community. That, sometimes you find yourself in a spot.
Yep, you do.
Sometimes you find yourself in a condition where you're like, wait, this is not what I was expecting. This is not what it should be.
Yeah.
And the way that we move through that, and the way that you build out the muscle to move through that, is by practicing from a very early age. Number one, how to recognize when there's harm, but also what you do when there's harm. Who do you call when there's harm? We are not about necessarily calling in the state. Right. When there's harm. So what does the community look like when there's harm, right? Yeah. What does the extended family look like when there's harm? I think some communities have done that more naturally and historically than other communities. Right. But, in this conversation about protecting girls' bodies, it's essential for us to not be in this culture of silence and this complicit way that we sort of um, make her have to be in harmful scenarios and environments because it sort of satiates, what we perceive to be the family function, for example.
Exactly.
We're coming up on the holidays, right? It is very, very difficult for survivors to go home sometimes because there's that elder who has caused harm and who was never held accountable.
Exactly.
And so much of the sort of culture of Vegas, that's why, we just say the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of mentality.
Right.
What happens in the family stays in the family. We don't talk about it. Don't tell my business. Don't all these things for fear of being embarrassed when the casualty is the survivor.
Exactly.
Right. And so I'm not willing to sacrifice.
That's right.
And I don't
no longer.
I don't believe we ever had to. And I think that the more we start to build out a culture where more than just women can protect the bodies of girls, then we start to normalize and create a popular culture where that's just despicable behavior that we just don't tolerate.
Yeah.
And so, but that comes with an understanding that feminism is not a cuss word.
Right.
That, her power is not a threat to yours.
Right.
Right. That we all grow together when we're in community together, and it creates a more robust learning opportunity for our communities, but also a condition of well-being across the board. And so what I'm encouraged by is, I think maybe 10 years ago, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of Push Out.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started talking about the criminalization of Black girls in schools, and many men would not want to engage. Or they would say, I can't speak on the girls. I don't know what to say about the girls. That's not my area. And slowly but surely, we started to move in and say, no, actually, what I started saying was, not only can you speak on the girls, but you must. Right? Like, you must speak on the girls, and you must interrogate your own behavior and thoughts and understandings of what their experiences are. And you must speak to the girls, not just speak on. They speak to girls. Because they do have a unique lens that moves us closer to our visions of democracy, or an inclusive democracy. They do have experiences that move us closer to well-being. They are going to emerge as the keepers of culture and stories. They are going to pass it on. And so as we think about these unique, traits or, sort of functions of people in our families, you want them to be well, you want them to be whole, and so, you achieve that when you start young, when you start by recognizing them as, babies into girls, into young women, into however they define themselves as adults. And so it's a trajectory, it's a growth trajectory that I'm asking people to understand, that even as you look at how, most girls will grow into these women who likely are doing great things, holding spaces in their families, even if it's not like on the news, or, if they're holding an important function in their families, but that they are worthy of investment just because.
Yes.
And so it doesn't matter who you're partnered with or who you give birth to, right? That we want to invest in young people who will grow into adults who we want to have in our communities.
Yeah. That's the thing. We have to, we want good neighbors. We want good people, right? I'm wondering if we have, so this is a time for y'all to think about your questions.
Yeah.
And to start thinking about this. I'm going to go to open up another question. It's in my phone. It locked on me. There's so much. I mean, I think number one, there's also something so, it's also a salve for like the girl child that's within us, especially I'm just thinking about this book as, I mean, I'm always thinking about, okay, so what's the call to action? What should one do? And I'm thinking even for those who how can we be playing this? So you give us this guidebook. I think for some of us is that we have to reconcile with our own girlhood, right? We have to like resolve it, really think about
Oh
it,
yeah.
interrogate
Oh
it,
yeah.
heal it, love it,
Absolutely. Like embrace her.
embrace her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I went through a period where I didn't even as long as I've been doing this work, I didn't even realize I hadn't fully embraced her.
Right.
Right. Like there was this picture of me at 9 years old that, it's like a goofy picture, hair flying, like terrible picture, but from a wonderful day of play, at school. It was picture day.
Yeah.
And I remember
Yes.
I had one of those pictures.
Yes, I know. I have like 6. Yes.
But there was a period of time where, like my front teeth were too big and like I could not look at that picture and I would just be disgusted every single time I looked at that picture.
Wow.
And my daughter would be like, look, and I was like, don't show me that picture. I don't like this picture. It looks terrible is all I would say. And then one day my aunt showed the picture and I had been doing some other work.
Yeah.
And I looked at that picture and for the first time I saw her.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, like what a cutie pie.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was like so goofy and innocent, but not.
Yeah.
And, I was like, I do love her.
Yeah.
Right. But I had to see her. And I had buried her because she was living through some things that I wanted to bury.
Right.
And so I really wasn't responding to myself. I was responding to the things that were happening to me at that time.
Yes.
And so because I had not reconciled with that, it was keeping me from fully engaging my whole self.
Yeah.
And so in the work that I was doing to get other people, right? It's one thing, it's very easy to say the words and to be out in community and encouraging folks to do the thing. And it's another thing to be in practice around that yourself.
Yeah.
And so many of us are survivors who lead this work, who are in this work,
right?
That in many ways, there's an intentional healing that has to take place around that girlhood. And even if there's nothing to survive that is about physical harm, it is also, all of us are dealing with the conditions around us that placed limits on our future.
Absolutely.
Right? Like my grandma is from Texas. She played basketball. I love that about her. Right? Like I'm like, my grandmama played basketball. Like that's incredible.
Yes.
And she played on a half court and in a skirt.
Yes.
Like, there were all the things that placed the barriers on her full ability to express herself as a baller.
Right.
And so, in my mind, she was a baller. Like I just see her as that. Right. By the time I came to know her, she was grandma.
Yeah.
Right. But it is, a beautiful, to me, example of how we have normalized the conditions that hold us at half court.
Yes.
Because we're still like, oh, well, at least we get to play.
Absolutely.
Rather than thinking about what if we do have full court?
Yeah. What if, this is what this book is about. What if we have full court? We've so much determined our lives by that half court. I think that's such a really great way to think about it. And not just, I also think about, so you're not a girl when you read this book. You may or may not be. But also for gender expansive people, trans folks who read and engage this book, to also reimagine and recapture their childhood, which may have been different, to give some language to it, because the same types of investment are also needed for gender expansive young people, for trans young people, to believe and trust their knowing, that they be safe from gender-based violence, that the investment, that the mentorship, are all very key fundamental parts of developing and building out strong, smart, kind young people.
Yes.
I mean, adults, young people and adults.
And I mean, I'm very clear and say throughout different works. So I guess if you read the collection, you see how like every book is like a love letter to our community, one way or another, and a love letter to all the people who do this incredible work every day. And I'm very clear that misogyny and sexism are tied to homophobia, transphobia, and all the systems of harm around our constructs of gender. And so it is important to, even though those are academic terms that sometimes lose people, it's important to just, for me to boil it down to like, do you see young people? Do you see the spirit in front of you? Do you see these young like energies that are trying to grow?
Right.
And then what do you do to make sure they grow into healthy adults?
Right.
Period.
Period. That's really it.
Like, period.
And especially when
So,
we see so many, especially, I mean, I don't have to tell y'all the attacks that we're seeing that are focused on young people, especially trans young people and their families, as truly talking about stopping someone's potential right in their tracks. We have to be really mindful
yeah.
of that there are, well, our opposition sees our young people as a place to target.
Well, the thing is, like, forces of oppression see young people as threats.
Yes.
Period. Like, when I was writing my like master's thesis in 1995, that was looking at the criminalization of young people at that point and the growth of group homes. They were sedating young people, right, in juvenile detention facilities, preemptively sedating young people because they saw them as super predators.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so there's this language and way that youth is vilified because, you know, forces of oppression seek to do many things, and they manifest in four primary ways. So they manifest in interpersonal communications and relationships, structurally, culturally, but also in internalized ways, which is the hardest thing to undo, because once you believe those things about yourself, then they don't have to do hard work, right? You do it yourself.
Yes.
You believe it yourself, right? And so a lot of this is about us challenging you know, what young people can believe about themselves, right?
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons why I get kind of personal in the book, because not only did I want to and was encouraged to share more of my own personal journey toward being an advocate for girls and why I do what I do, but also because so many young people have seen me as, you know, Dr. Monique, and I want them to understand I didn't arrive this way.
Right.
Right. That there was a lot of work that went into me being who I am at 53, right? That it is not, this person was not here and had to do a whole lot of work when I was 18, right? Meeting me at 18, you would have met a different person.
Right.
And so knowing that there's a lifetime of recovery and some very specific things that were done to create interventions and buffers to get me to this point is important. There were people involved in my well-being. There were decisions that were made to support me. There were decisions that I made for myself that supported me, right? I want to thank me, right? So there are definitely, you know, it's meant to be in some ways also a love letter to the little girl who was surviving in that picture, so that we can recognize her when she steps in front of us today.
Yes, I mean, I would love to open it up for questions, but I think you really send us out with our marching orders that there were interventions, not just one, but multiple along the way that can change the trajectory of the lives of girls and gender expansive people. And every one of us can be one of those interventions that can make a difference. So it could be through giving your money to an organization that focuses on girls and gender expansive people. It could be you know, like actively mentoring. It could be making sure, checking in on your young people and asking some of those questions and interrupting the conspiracy of silence. Hey, let's talk about, has anybody been crossing any boundaries with you? Are you, you know, like, you know, the questions that we need to have that we oftentimes don't. I know that I have them. I don't just start with like, so like, hey, you know, let's talk about this. Do you know that your body's yours? Do you know that no one has access to it unless you want them to? That I'm a person that no matter what they say, they can't hurt me. You know, you can tell me I'm a person, I will believe you. Those, I know it seems small, but that can make a difference. It can make and you also give us so much more information and tools around how we can do that inside this incredible guidebook so that we can unlock the potential and the magic of girls and gender expansive people. So do y'all have any questions, either from our online folks or the folks here? Okay.
Hi, thanks for having this tonight. My question is around for those of us that are here that also like work in the space of serving girls, I find that I come from a family of girls and women, right? It inspired the work. But now that I'm in the work, I often feel a lot of guilt around how I interact with the girls in my family. And I'm always like, am I not showing up for them? You know, here I am saying I'm this advocate for girls and I'm doing all these things for girls and I'm inspired by the girls in my life, right? But it's like, am I showing up? Am I still being the big cousin, the big sister, the all the things that I'm supposed to be? And I asked you that question since you mentioned raising daughters, and I think about the fact that I don't have any children right now, and I always think about that. Is like, when and if there's a day, you know, that I have a young daughter and I'm doing this work, what is that going to look like? And how do I remain the advocate for girls, but the mom to this little girl or the big cousin and the big sister to these other little girls? So if you could share how you navigate that, I'd love to hear more and continue to dive deeper in the book.
Thank you. I try to be me. I try to be consistent. I'm a, you know, my first act of leadership was being a big sister to a younger brother. So even like in being a mother, like part of, I saw my work of standing in the gap for the girls in my family as being able to have these conversations with my own brothers, right?
Yes,
and talking
absolutely.
to them. I talk in the same way that I was talking to my girls about how to determine what is appropriate and inappropriate. I was also talking to my brother about that and had conversations with them together, because I was like, we're not doing this. Right? It was an intentional way to stand in the gap. You know, there has been harm in my family, and I tried to offer resources and engagement where I can, and I try to always be very clear when I walk in the room. At this point, everybody kind of knows that I'm going to be on the team of girls who are, you know, in recovery. And so it's a blessing, but what I tried to do is not make it a burden, honestly, because there's a lot of harm that happens when you have a big family, and so you can't show up for everyone. And I'm very clear that I can't show up for everyone, but I can in the sense that I can be sort of a blanket source of information if something goes off the rails, and to try to be a blanket source of preventative talk so that, you know, folks understand what should be in place in our communities and in our families. But I do take my role as big cousin seriously, and big sister seriously, and auntie, you know, seriously, as much as I take my position as mother seriously. And so, you know, for me, it's a decision. You know, I early on, before I even got really fully immersed in this work, I was clear that my priorities were going to be securing the well-being of my daughters, or my children, right? I didn't know I was going to have two girls. And so that was my priority. And I happened to have two girls. And I was like, yay. And that also meant, though, I was terrified. I hadn't yet healed 9-year-old me. I was terrified. Like, I lived in Oakland, and on Easter Sunday, the Pips had a walk. You know what I mean? And so I was like, oh my God, I'm raising girls surrounded by sharks. You know what I mean? And so I had to do some really intentional things to help elevate the consciousness. I talk a little bit about it, you know, sports, judo, protect body, have conversations, like all the things that I could do to try to make sure that there was a level of consciousness and structural analysis so that they could identify if something was off. And that's the same thing that I've tried to do with any young person who comes into my world. Is if you are a young person and you come to me and you ask a question, like, you're going to get a real answer.
Right.
You're going to get a real answer. Yeah. And it's going to be an answer that is both an honest one from my experience, but also one that tries to give you a little more around a structural understanding so that you can start to claim your own power in your own decision making. And that's the thing that I think we can do as family members, but also just know that don't take responsibility for everybody, you know?
Yeah, I think that you are what you shared is, I don't know any leader or activist who doesn't navigate the reality of, I'm this person in my personal life, in my family, you know, they I've actually done a lot of work to be like, okay, I'm gonna ensure my mom, my sister, you're a feminist. We're gonna dig in. My brother, same. I'm on your head. Now, and they've gotten there. It wasn't easy. It's been decades of work to be able to move people. And there's some people I was never able to move my dad. Like he was a homophobic man. He never moved in that way. And so I got to determine my relationship with him based off of that. But what you're talking about, I think, is always it's like the survivor's guilt, or the person who starts to know more. What do I do? What's my, what can I do? And I agree with what you said around, I want the people to know, you want the people to know in your family that you can come to me, that I'm a trusted person. And it can feel like I'm saving everybody else in the world, but what about my family? Again, I think you're not alone as you're trying to navigate this big piece, but our families are our own battlegrounds where we're trying to figure out, but at least you're willing, because some people don't even try to bring the conversations to their family, right? They're just like, I'm just not going to even have it. Like, that's my job. But what we're talking about is our life, right? So be willing to be in the contradiction and the uncomfortableness of it. And with time, I think that it will become more easeful, not easy. And that you will be seen as a trusted person, so that your nieces, your cousins will know, hey, something happened, I can go to Auntie so-and-so.
And that matters. Like when young people know that there's at least one adult in their family who will believe them and who they can go to, like the worst feeling is you don't have a single elder that you can go to. Right. So if you establish yourself as at least, as a person people can go to, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal. So you're not alone. Many of us are walking that. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, you can hear the people are like, yes, me too, I'm trying to figure this out. Any other questions before we wrap up for this incredible conversation with Monique about her great offering to the world? Yeah, sure.
The last question is more a work side question. So I run an organization called Girls Going Global, and we do global leadership work. And oftentimes I also feel like we're just cute. Like I think people look at us and it's like, oh, they're so cute. Their stuff is pink. They go on because I feel like, God forbid, these days you have pink in your stuff, like no, seriously, it feels like if you say girl and then you attach it to pink, then there's all these assumptions and connotations that come around it. And I feel like we can't be seen as social justice, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have pink branding, or because we say that we want to travel with young girls, that can't possibly mean education. That can't possibly mean justice work as we travel to these other countries, right? And I feel a lot of things around that. And I guess my question would be, how do we, as we continue to say we want to change the narrative, right, of what justice looks like or what advocacy looks like, for those of us that may sometimes feel discouraged in this space, like how do we continue to show up? Does it look like, well, you need to maybe be better about telling your story? I feel like that's one lens that gets said a lot. Or, is there something else that we should be thinking about to make sure that, we're also taken seriously? Or I don't know. I don't know how to wrap it up in a nice, pretty question, but I think you follow what I'm saying, that tension of showing up in the space.
I do. I think that's one of the benefits of having an organization like G4GC. Frankly, I think that we're a philanthropic intermediary that does a lot of education within philanthropy and within giving spaces, that we're able to challenge that kind of infantilization that happens. That's one thing that I do mention in the book, is just this way that philanthropy will sort of create a space where it's like a no-win situation for organizations that do this kind of very rigorous work that's just unrecognized as such, because of the culture of infantilizing and calling cute the work because of branding. And then there's an adultification of girls where they'll give to women's organizations and expect it to trickle down, or just adultify, especially if the girls in the program are Black and brown bodies, they will be adultified. And so so there's a lot of work in education. So I'm less inclined to say, like, tell your story, but I don't think it ends there. Like, a lot of people will be like, it's about narrative shift, tell your story, and then things will change. And I don't think that's right. I think what happens is we start to require and set out conditions within philanthropy and within giving circles. And we do a lot of political education around how that work is actually rigorous. And we build out grant making systems that honor and look for those things. And that's been a lot of our work at G4GC, which is we'll go into other spaces and then we'll look at what they're determining as power building work. And then we'll say, well, what about X, Y, Z? Because that's how it shows up with these organizations. So does your rubric include ABC? And so I think that's where we've got to get into the weeds a little more around making sure that it doesn't just appear to be a sort of soft, like, here's all that we can do, but this is where everybody has a role to play.
Yes.
And this is where you step into, your role on the team, right? And this is where I think you continue to maintain the robustness of your program. You continue to take girls into global spaces and document how there are transformations that occur when they're exposed to these other communities and they're able to locate themselves differently and have a different shift in consciousness. You document all those things, right? And then we will continue to push on our end, and then others will continue to advocate on their end. And then, I do think there's a role for storytellers in here, though. And I think that the role of storytellers is to not just, sort of write books or tell stories on social media, but to also write very robust creative things, right? Works of fiction, works of engagement around television and film that start to make these connections. Because often when we see girls, the people make this sort of assumption that the work is not rigorous because when it's presented to them, it's the girls looking cute on the trip, right? Rather than girls looking cute on the trip and then they write a book about what they learned, like this one did. Right? 2 books about the travels, right? So it's about making these connections that allow for us to understand that girls are processing what they're learning in these spaces, and that you can control the narrative about your own understanding when you do these things as well. I mean, like your own sense of knowing when you do these things.
I was about to say, it's the knowing, right? That so much of what you're talking about is in this space that is philanthropy that has really been based on white patriarchal knowing, that your work that you're doing is creating a new way of knowing, creating different rubrics so that your work can be more easily interpreted and seen. And unfortunately, that translation, we hate that translation exists, but it's really important that that's happening. And there isn't, that when people well, just shift your narrative, that's not it, because in general, they also have to shift the way they believe and see girls, which is like at the core of it.
That's right.
Right? Is potential, as important now, not just the future, worthy, valuable. And so, I know it's deeply discouraging, and please keep doing your necessary and important work. Yeah.
Sure.
So, do you want to close?
Yeah. Out? Did we have any questions?
Any online questions?
Just lots of enthusiasm and agreement.
No question. So, this book, Girls Unlimited, is for purchase now. And will you sign people's book?
I am signing people's.
Great. Books. So I have my copy. Let's please give it up for the wonderful, brilliant, our champions and girls.
Thank you, Charis.
Thank you.
Brilliant mind right here.
Thank
you so much.
Mine first. Set it up. Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks everybody for coming out on a Sunday night
when
it
gets so
early, like at 2:00.